I'd like to call this meeting into order of the Curriculum Subcommittee, East Haddam Board of Education. Just for your own information, there are exits here, exits there, exits there. In the event that all the air should be sucked out of this room, oxygen will fall from the ceiling. Little mask, we put it around your face. Breathe, it'll flow automatically. In the event that we are swamped, your seat will be a flotation device. Grasp it, hold it around, and breathe like heck. Okay. Did you get all of that? I just figured you got to do this when I don't do something besides that. I hope the oxygen works. Okay, so if we can begin, please, ladies and gentlemen. I do see a little flag way in the back. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Tellep, I understand you asked for a moment?
Yes, Mr. Tellep.
I'm sorry?
Never mind.
I didn't know we were...
Yeah. So I know a lot of you here are here to support the proposal that the EHEA put forward about having a curriculum council, a consensus-based curriculum council that would include parents as part of that. We had a conversation earlier today, and Dr. Iacobelli and some of the board members that were in that meeting thought it was a great idea, and so it looks like that's going to be moving forward. So I just want to let you all know that in the event that you had other things that were pressing and you kind of moved your schedule to be here, you might want to know that if that's why you're here, then that's been dealt with. And so I wanted to alert you all to that in the event that you wanted to step out.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
All right. You got a copy of the last minutes that were sent out at the board meeting. Remember, right? Any questions? Agenda has two areas. What I'd like to do first is take a look at where we stand in terms of curriculum review and revision in the different areas, and then lay out a plan for what we might be able to get accomplished. That is either K-12 in the case of most programs, or 6-12, I think, in the case of world language, and see what we might get done, ready for Board of Education approval within the next 13 months. That's my timeline for the initial beginning of this, since most of these curricula are anywhere from 8 to 15 years old. And while there may have been bits and pieces done, there's been no unified or consistent thing. So I'd ask Mr. Belli and then perhaps Mr. Strand if they would be willing to kind of update us on that.
Mr. Strand has coordinated a district-wide audit where teams of teachers, grade level or department teams, have sat down together and done some reflection about where they are now using a rubric that was devised to help facilitate this. So where are these teams and departments now? And then given what we have in terms of time, where do we believe we could be? What are some reasonable goals, attainable goals by June? So in terms of curriculum, where we are now, where would we like to be in June? And some rough outline of how we're going to get there from here. So I'm going to let Steve speak to the results of that audit and that planning work that the teams have done.
Most of the teams came in. The audit was based on a scoring system of essentially aligned, functioning, and in place to in progress. And in progress there's a vast degree of what's noted as in progress, and there were certain domains tied to that in terms of whether it was curriculum was noted as horizontally aligned, meaning per grade level it was tied together as opposed to vertically from one grade to the next and so forth. And then the score point 1 was in need of significant work. Predominantly, I would say 95% of the teams came in across the district as score point 1s. And as you alluded to, it's because most curricular pieces are anywhere from 8 to 15 years old. So each group has basically set up a timeline based on a PD schedule about where they can be and so forth. And it depends on the grade level. I'll give you an example. Math, just by its nature, is much more linear. Their standards are sequenced in a much more linear fashion. What they need the most assistance with and work comes down to assessment. You have other subject areas and disciplines which are predicated on other variables in place. Another example, science right now, across the board, is waiting for the next generation science standards to be adopted by the state of Connecticut. There's no need to jump in with both feet in order to do a total curricular rewrite until we see what Connecticut actually adopts. So what those folks are in charge of doing right now, their charge, is to develop essentially correlations between the next generation science standards to where it's most applicable. Develop vocabulary banks, resources, essential questioning based on topics and so forth. And so when the curriculum is finally adopted, to make the moves accordingly then. Social studies is in a similar situation. The only thing is that social studies, luckily, is that the first draft of the Connecticut framework, which has been in place, you're a social studies guy, it's been in draft form since 2009, 7. Put it this way, it hasn't been redone by the state in terms of standard content frameworks since 2004. So they're coming out with theirs. I'm going to a workshop, a curriculum council meeting on Friday to see an initial iteration to that so that I can come back and provide it to our folks here. From there, they're going to be doing the same thing that science is doing. ELA, it comes down to a process as well, which comes down to a little more variables such as text complexity and the like, for which we have to adapt and adopt protocols. We have a process in the district right now for which textbook and resource adoption isn't in place. So that has to be correlated along with resource materials tied to unit structures. So, different groups are at different places. We're looking at, hopefully, with June, with the PD calendar, through summer work to assess. Hopefully there'll be a third completed to start the year off, going into next year. But as you know, curriculum's an iterative process. Keeps going. And so some of this is going to be changed and modified as teachers teach it. Teachers are getting certainly accustomed to standards in the way they're constructed now with Common Core. There's new content standards tied to disciplines, which I just alluded to, for which they have to become acclimated. And that process in whole is going to take, look, any curriculum cycle, it's a good 3-year cycle. 13 months, 16 months, we'll be in much, much different spot than we are now.
So if we started with .0 in 2013, is that at .0?
Okay.
That means you're saying it won't be until 2016 if we see any?
Oh, no, we'll see something. Put it this way, we're already seeing things now. We're already seeing curriculum being constructed. It's just the volume for where we see a year progression move from really September to June that we can feel comfortable about and use it as a cyclical learning process. By the end of next year, we'll have a year's worth of curriculum.
So we're looking at 13 months from now?
Yeah.
What areas do you think you would have a vertical or horizontally aligned curriculum?
Math is certainly a spot which I would recommend starting.
Okay.
I would also spend a significant amount of time on ELA.
Okay.
And, social, at the elementary level, certainly social studies and science are integrated into the process.
I recognize, and I don't want to dominate this, I recognize that, you've got 10, 9 curricula to look at, areas to look at, and we can't do, it would be nice to say, let's do all 9 of them at one time. We can't do that. we wouldn't have the resources to implement them properly when the time came. It'd just simply be, when you're looking at textbooks, support materials, and so on, 9 times whatever that amount would be something that budgetarily would be impossible. What I'm looking at is, I'm glad to hear you say math is one, because we know math is one we need to address. If we do math and English language arts, is there a reasonable expectation that we have those 2 curricula ready to go to the board, say by April, May at the latest of 2015?
I feel relatively confident. It comes down to the structures in place in order to get the work done. You know, so again, when push comes to shove, something like math, certainly the standards have shifted and so forth, but our folks have done a nice job in terms of acclimating to that. It comes down to really performance assessment.
The other part to me that's critical to this is going to be the implementation, which is determining what materials are going to be needed, both textbooks and related materials. Is it unreasonable to ask that we develop at least a rough outline of those costs for inclusion in the 15-16 budget? I realize that's going to be kicking in October. We're starting to develop that. But can staff put together, look at materials and get a rough idea of where they're going to be needing new books, new materials, and we can come in with a package in math and in language arts and start to develop the concept of having a line within our budget for curriculum implementation?
Yeah, without question. The notion is this, though, right now. Think about it. If you want to get into a money-making, I don't know how high quality it is, but a money-making business right now, throw a Common Core label on a book and start selling it.
I know that.
And so there's more out there that's probably not of the highest quality than there is. And anything written right now in terms of a textbook, I don't care what the discipline is, was written before the Common Core was essentially constructed to the point where we know what it means right now. So those are vendor practices and the like. But undoubtedly, there's going to be a whole litany of resources that are available for our perusal. Even within the next look, it changes every few months. We see better stuff, more resources in terms of its efficacy, tied to the curriculum implementation, and so forth. What happens far too often is that people jump on this notion of resources being the silver bullet. As we all well know in this business, no resources. If there was a silver bullet, we would have had that fixed a long time ago. So, along with the resources that are needed, you know, and part of the curricular process in terms of coming up with this, say in ELA, is coming up with resources to read, literally the text to read, that are proving to be a little bit of a shift away from perhaps some of the canon that used to exist to more definitive informational texts and the like. And so we have to make sure that we have those resources across the board and that the text complexity supports learners. Because right now, you know, as you well know, if we have texts, you know, that are not only antiquated in terms of their structure and format, but you know, certainly they don't apply in terms of readiness and instructional reading levels for kids.
And I would assume that the expertise of our staff in these areas would come to bear. They would certainly be able to assess and determine that.
Through a protocol.
Right.
We're going to have to be able to, you know, professionally develop that.
So I don't want to dominate. What I'm trying to do is get a handle on something that we can say to the community that within the next year we're going to come in with this, and then we're going to step up from there and say, where do we go from here? So we can start to get a handle on this and get it back up to the standards that it ought to be. I don't know.
And so when you're looking at the resources, the books and whatnot, are you looking at like a K-12 buying a whole set all the way through, or
That's difficult because there's so many variables associated with how one constructs curriculum. But certainly there should be some grounding elements and core competencies tied to what resources are applied. Essentially, there needs to be a criteria. And it's not only based on utility, but it's based on, you know, obviously a litany of other variables associated with resources tied to instructional competencies. I showed you a
Is that
graph.
the ideal though, like to get your resources K-12 and that's it, and like it's done, and instead of trying to do,
Geez, in this day and age, you know, the bottom line is, I mean, look, I'll give you an example of my kids. Kids live in the same town. My kids